All right, folks, thank you very much. A lot of people have registered for tonight's webinar, but we'll start up now. We will be sending out at the end of this event the recording and the slides for everyone who registered, whether they attended or not. But we thank you for joining with us on a beautiful evening. So tonight's webinar is called Truth to Power. Increasingly over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of misinformation and disinformation about clean energy and fossil fuels, and it's really dangerous. To define terms, misinformation is if you think you read something or heard something from a friend or whatever that's incorrect, and you spread that in some way to another person on Facebook or at a barbecue, and it's false information, but you didn't know that. That's what we call misinformation, and there's a lot of that. But usually the misinformation is driven or spurred on or sparked by disinformation, and that is the deliberate spreading of falsehoods. And we have seen across the spectrum of energy issues that the disinformation is becoming incredibly cost effective. The fossil fuel industry, and sometimes utilities, and sometimes politicians, if you can believe that, will spread disinformation on purpose in the hopes that misinformation will then take it from there, and it'll be multiplied in its effect. And we've kind of had it with that here at Green Energy Consumers Alliance, because we know that clean energy is better all around for society. It's affordable, it's healthy, it creates good jobs and choices for consumers. And that's the truth. We're going to tell the story tonight. We're going to try to point out the misinformation, disinformation, and talk to you about some of the truths, just so you can be better prepared when you're at a barbecue or you're posting something on Facebook or you see something on Facebook. But if you're here, you're probably 95% of you are probably on the same page as we are. But here we are. We're trying to empower you with some information. Next slide, please. So here we are, Green Energy Consumers Alliance. That's a great group of board and staff. We're a nonprofit organization. If you didn't know, we're based in Massachusetts and Rhode Island with offices in Boston and Providence. And we have a mission, and every word here is important to us, to empower consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. Next slide, please. So here we are. I have brought to you a panel of the best and brightest in me, and we're going to have Anna Vanderspeck, our electric vehicle program director, Amanda Barker, our clean energy program coordinator, Carrie Catan is our Massachusetts policy advocate, and Tina Munter, our Rhode Island policy advocate. That seems to be cut off on my screen, but we're all here, and our email addresses are there. Depending upon what we say, you can contact any one of us. First name at greenenergyconsumers.org. Next slide. So the basics, sorry, but you're going to be muted throughout the webinar. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation. Use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask the questions, and we'll look at those at the end. We'll take them at the end. If you'd like to use closed captions, you can click CC at the bottom of your screen. And again, we'll send the slides and recording to you after the webinar. Next slide. So today's agenda. I've already explained the difference between disinformation and misinformation, but now we're going to get into specifics. Offshore wind, electric vehicles, energy cost in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And then we've got a special action alert. I wonder what that is. We'll get into that at the end. And then we're going to open it up for questions. Now, I've got some of the smartest people in the world on energy issues, and we're going to take them one at a time. But then there's an opportunity for staff to buzz in if they want to add something to what one of their colleagues has said. So we'll kick it off with a discussion about offshore wind. Amanda, is there a lot of misinformation and disinformation about offshore wind?
There certainly is, which is what I will be talking to you all about tonight. So, first, I want to just explain why offshore wind is so critical to New England. We often hear people say that they want renewable energy and they want to do something about climate change, but there are better ways to meet our energy needs than offshore wind. And I want to very clearly say that that is not true. Um, this graphic on the right is from a broader report on New England's total clean energy potential. And it found that offshore wind makes up over half of all the renewable energy available to harness across New England. And it really makes the most sense for our region of all of the clean energy sources. We have extremely high demand along our coasts. We have some of the strongest winds in the entire world right off of our coasts. And we also have shallow waters, which is ideal for turbine installation. So offshore wind is really, without question, the biggest lever that we can pull to decarbonize our electricity here in New England. Next slide. So now to get into some of the disinformation that we've been hearing about offshore wind. Currently, Rhode Island and Massachusetts are working to get their first large-scale offshore wind projects over the finish line. That's Vineyard Wind and Revolution Wind. And unfortunately, fossil fuel interests are working behind the scenes to push back. We have seen several so-called local offshore wind opposition groups pop up, often repeating talking points from the fossil fuel industry. These groups use emotional narratives about whales and fisheries while ignoring the impact of oil and gas extraction on marine life. So we want to encourage you to be really mindful about what you're hearing and where the information is coming from. So we've provided a list of helpful resources if you're interested in learning more on how to combat disinformation and misinformation. This first resource is Against the Wind. It's a report by the Brown Climate and Development Lab. And in it, there's a great map showing how some local anti-wind groups are actually connected to conservative think tanks that are fueled by the fossil fuel industry. The second resource, Real Offshore Wind, is a really helpful website where scientists and academics answer frequently asked questions about offshore wind. False Rumors in the Wind is a great article that addresses disinformation being spread by offshore wind opponents. What's Up with Offshore Wind webinar series is a great three-part webinar put on by the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition. And it really goes into depth on disinformation and how to best address disinformation. Then I also linked an article from the Providence Journal that explains that scientists have found absolutely no link between offshore wind and whale deaths. And then lastly, just today, there was an op-ed posted by the Dean of Brown University's School of Public Health, pointing out that local clean energy is crucial for improving public health. And in this op-ed, they talked about how in Massachusetts, more than 95% of air pollution comes from the burning of fossil fuels. And so a shift to 100% clean electricity, as well as electric vehicles, which my colleague Anna will talk to you all about in a second, um, that shift could really save Massachusetts $14.7 billion in health costs. It could prevent over 28,000 asthma attacks and avoid 1,350 premature deaths over a 30-year period. So this really is not just about combating climate change. It's about public health. It's about jobs. It's about improving the local economy. There are really so many benefits. The list goes on and on of all the benefits that offshore wind can bring to our region and to our states.
But Amanda, if there's no link between whale deaths and offshore wind, why are some people saying that there are links between them? Do you think?
We are finding that that is a fossil fuel industry talking point that is intentionally being spread. That is a clear example of disinformation that local groups are picking up and using to try and combat offshore wind from being developed.
Okay, that's bad. Go ahead.
So I want to tell you what the science actually says. So again, there is no evidence linking offshore wind to whale deaths. Marine scientists have debunked that. Um, I also want to say that organizations like the National Wildlife Federation, oceanographers at the University of Rhode Island, and lifelong marine scientists all support offshore wind because they recognize that climate change is the biggest threat to marine life. Studies have also shown that offshore wind can actually benefit marine life. Turbines can act as artificial reefs, which are shown in these images here, where they can actually create habitat for fish and other marine life. And studies have shown that there's actually a higher abundance of fish near wind farms compared to surrounding areas. And, I've heard from recreational fishermen in Rhode Island that they actually go right up to the Black Island wind farm and fish right off the side of the turbines because they know that fish have taken up habitat in that structure there, and they're more likely to catch fish right off the side of the turbine. So with that, I just really want to underscore that saying no to offshore wind is saying yes to more natural gas plants polluting the air we breathe. It's saying yes to more gas pipelines, and it's saying yes to the catastrophic impacts of climate change, which includes warming oceans and acidification that have a profound impact on marine life. So offshore wind is really the biggest lever that we can pull to mitigate climate change and to protect marine life in the process. So with that, I will pass it off to my colleague Anna to talk to you all about electric vehicle misinformation.
Thanks, Amanda. So I am coming with two sort of the top misconceptions that we run into when we are out hosting events and talking to people about electric vehicles at Earth Day fairs or community events all across the state. And the first one that we hear a lot is that electric vehicles are just as dirty as gas-powered cars, either because there's so much coal on our grid or because the battery manufacturing takes so much energy. And so the one graphic that I can use to dispel this is this resource from the Union of Concerned Scientists that looks at the life cycle emissions, so from cradle to grave, of gasoline cars versus electric cars and gasoline trucks versus electric trucks. So I'm just going to walk us through this graphic. So the first thing you'll notice is that each one of these bars has an orange slice, and that orange slice is the manufacturing of the vehicle. So these are the greenhouse gas emissions that are the result of the manufacturing of the vehicle. And you can see if you kind of squint that the manufacturing emissions of the vehicle are lower for electric vehicles compared to their gas counterparts. But electric vehicles have an additional slice, which is the blue slice, and that is the greenhouse gas emissions from the manufacturing of the battery. Manufacturing a battery is an energy-intensive process, so the greenhouse gas emissions up front from manufacturing a new gas car or a new new gas car or new gas truck are lower than those of a new electric car or electric truck. But the story obviously does not end there. UCS also looks at the operating emissions of driving those vehicles and what those greenhouse gas emissions look like. So you can see that for each electric vehicle on this graph, the gray bar of the vehicle operation is much smaller for the electric version than the gas. And if you take all of that together for an electric car, UCS found a 52% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions over the life of the vehicle, and for electric trucks, it was a 57% reduction. What I want to stress, though, here is that in New England, we've got a much cleaner grid than the national average, and this analysis was done using a national average. So if you were to do the same analysis with the emissions on the grid in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, that emission would be even starker, or the emissions reduction would be even starker. And if you are in one of the many communities across our two states that has a green municipal aggregation program and you opt up to 100% local renewable energy, that goes all the way down to 0 for the vehicle operation. So myth one is that EVs are really dirty. Truth is they're a lot cleaner than gas vehicles. This segues nicely to our next myth, which is that the grid can't handle electric vehicles. We hear this a lot. There's a lot of news about grid issues all across the country, and people see that and think, oh goodness, we're not prepared for that. But the truth is we can be. So first thing to know is that this transition to electric vehicles is gradual. We're not going to suddenly wake up tomorrow and have everybody drive an electric vehicle. And even when we do have everybody drive an electric vehicle, those electric vehicles don't all plug into the grid at once. In fact, electric vehicles load is considered flexible, which means it's easy to shift. If you need to use a microwave, you want to use that microwave when you need food. So that's not very flexible. You're going to use that microwave when you want to have dinner. But with an EV, it doesn't really matter to you when it charges as long as it's ready to go when you need it to be. And so that means that there's a lot of flexibility in when we actually charge those electric vehicles. And we can shift a lot of the demand from electric vehicles to low demand periods. So right now that means overnight when Amanda makes sure we have lots of offshore wind, that'll be extra excellent because electric vehicles can soak up a lot of the generation from offshore wind overnight when other demand is pretty low. And in some places in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, electric vehicles are already serving as batteries through the Connected Solutions programs from our utilities to help smooth out supply and demand. So basically, they're being called on, like other distributed energy resources, to ramp down charging at moments of peak demand. Electric utilities across both states and state agencies are preparing to meet the demand. They're forecasting out, okay, what is electric vehicle adoption going to look like in the coming years? What does that mean for the investments that we need to make in the grid? In Massachusetts, we've got a couple different entities working on that across state agencies. So we have an Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Coordinating Council. We've had a Grid Modernization Advisory Council and procedures or processes at the Department of Public Utilities and with the energy agencies. So this is very top of mind in Massachusetts. In Rhode Island, we're sort of one step behind, but we're getting there. But Rhode Island has been pretty forward thinking and applying for federal funds to build out public charging infrastructure, knowing that there is this demand. But the good news is, again, this is a gradual transition. We've got time to prepare and the relevant entities are working on it. And then lastly, if I were allowed more time, I would have more to say on this, but electric vehicles exert a downward pressure on electricity rates, which means when you look at states all across the country and you look at how much revenue electric vehicle drivers have paid into the electric grid over time versus the costs that they have basically caused by requiring new service or electric vehicle charging stations, that new revenue really exceeds the costs. And this is true in California, where EV adoption is way ahead than Massachusetts and Rhode Island. But it's also true in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Synapse Energy Economics has put out a couple studies where they show you revenue costs, net revenue. And that is a good news story that is not told enough. A lot of people, when they hear electric vehicles and the grid, they think of only the costs, but the benefits far outweigh them even before we think about greenhouse gas emission reduction or public health. So truth on this point is that EVs can help stabilize the grid. We've got time to prepare, and there's a lot of work in motion. So with that, I will pass it right along.
And I have a question. Some countries have much greater EV adoption than Massachusetts and Rhode Island. As far as you know, Norway and the Netherlands and China or California, those jurisdictions that have a lot of EV adoption, is their grid broken as a result of all those EVs?
Not yet. No, I shouldn't say not yet. No, it's not. No, it's not. And the exciting thing that I could also talk about with electric vehicles looking forward is that electric vehicles are giant batteries on wheels, and there are cool pilot programs now of those vehicles discharging electricity back onto the grid in moments of peak demand that we're going to hopefully see more and more of. The Massachusetts Clean Energy Center has a really cool pilot program on that right now. But that is yet another way where EVs can actually serve as a tool to protect the grid moving forward, especially given all the extreme weather events and everything else that we're looking forward to in the next couple of years.
On that last couple of points about the grid, Amanda does, along with Loie Hayes, does webinars about heat pumps. Amanda, are you also hearing that some people worry that the heat pumps are gonna break the grid too? Have you heard that?
We certainly have heard that, and that is not a concern, at least in the immediate future, because right now we have a summer peaking grid where we have enough electricity to supply us when it's really hot and everyone has their ACs on. And so we're essentially just going to shift to a winter peaking grid. But if we have the electricity to be able to supply all of those ACs in the summer, we should have that same electricity to be able to supply heat pumps to heat people's homes in the wintertime.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, we don't, as an organization, we don't want to discourage consumers from asking a question if they're wondering about uh, the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. If they sincerely don't know and they want to know, that we do want to encourage people to ask questions. What we're concerned about is when um, is the spread of misinformation and disinformation. So, um, okay, next slide. I think we're moving on to um, Carrie. Okay, this is relates to what we were just talking about. So go ahead.
Yes, it does. So my name's Carrie Katan. I do a lot of our Massachusetts building policy work. And so I've definitely heard a lot of misinformation when it comes to this, especially even coming from like there was one study that was put out by a group affiliated with MIT that was technically very sound, but they made a lot of very strange assumptions, and they came out with this result of, oh, it's way too expensive to build all electric unless you take away the odd assumptions they make, like they assumed that building all electric still involved hooking up a gas furnace for some reason, which added a few $1,000s in cost. But that's actually just a side note about disinformation in buildings. One really common thing that is heard is it is just too expensive. We cannot electrify all of the homes across the Commonwealth or in Rhode Island. We are going to be using fossil fuels forever. And the honest answer is it actually varies a lot in how much it costs to decarbonize a home. There will be homes where if you switch out their central AC with a heat pump, you have decarbonized that home and it's incredibly cheap. There will be homes that it requires a lot more work. Fortunately, the technologies, heat pump technologies are getting considerably better. And one area where I think the technology is getting really exciting is window mounted heat pumps that kind of just go in like an AC, but they're a bit beefier and they can handle heating your home in the summer, in the winter. Um, and I think that is really excited because there's always been some homes where they need a lot of really fundamental work to use regular heat pumps, but a window mounted unit, suddenly you don't have to care about the fact that the wall is old or it was built in like 1804 and all of the unique challenges that come from an old housing stock. You can just put something into the window like, many homes have been doing for decades. Another thing that's really worth noting is electric heat pumps can beat delivered fuels, so propane and oil, when it comes to price pretty consistently in New England now. And they're getting more competitive with gas costs, partly for reasons we're going to head into in a second. And yeah, as Amanda mentioned before, New England currently is a summer peaking electric grid. So we can add a lot more heat pumps for a while without necessarily overwhelming the grid. Now, it will be a challenge once we do become a winter peaking grid, just because compared to something like EVs, the amount of power it takes to heat homes across the region on those really cold days can be pretty considerable. But in this, we are kind of helped out by the fact that the utilities are already building infrastructure in preparation for that demand, in part because utilities in New England, at least the big investor-owned ones like Rhode Island Energy, National Grid, Eversource, they don't really make their money selling electricity. They really make their money building the infrastructure to get the electricity to your house, which in this case helps us because they're looking at increased electric loads in the future, and they are very excited to build all the infrastructure necessary to make sure that homes can be heated with electricity because it is within their best interests. Next slide. Now, there is also I mentioned utility incentives before, so we can also talk about what's happening on the gas side. There is a narrative going around that it is energy efficiency, so, partly Mass Save in Massachusetts, and a lack of pipelines that is making gas more expensive. And the reality of it is that's actually not what's happening. Um, there's a few different things that have kind of contributed to the fact that natural gas heating is much more expensive than it used to be even fairly recently. One of those is about a decade ago, there was a large explosion in California, and that incentivized a national movement for more fixing of gas infrastructure. So in Massachusetts, we have the GSEP program. Rhode Island has its own version of that. And that basically allowed the gas utilities to spend much more money doing maintenance on their old pipelines than they used to. And that includes stuff like taking out the old steel cast iron pipes, which from a safety perspective is great. From a cost perspective, it is really bad because it is incredibly expensive to remove all of those pipes and replace them with newer pipes. The total costs in Massachusetts are going to be in the tens of billions of dollars if the GSEP, the Gas System Enhancement Program, actually goes on for as long as it's projected to take. And another factor that we're seeing on the gas side kind of happening at the same time is partly because we've had a series of warmer winters before this last one, and partly because more homes are being built all electric, and partly because of the energy efficiency programs that states around here have invested a lot of money in, is that we're actually seeing gas demand either flat or falling. And you'd think that would make gas cheaper, but the way most of the cost of the gas system is maintaining those old gas pipes, especially more now that we're spending more than we used to on maintaining those old gas pipes. And that cost needs to be borne by customers, regardless of how much gas is actually going through the system. So if you're selling 1 million units of gas and it costs you $1 million to do that, you can sell it for like, $1 per unit of gas. But suddenly, if you're selling 500,000 units of gas, you may save money by having to buy less gas if you're the utility, but all of your maintenance costs are still the same size. So maybe it then costs you, $1.25 per unit of gas in order to heat everyone's homes. And that's what we're seeing, especially in parts of Massachusetts, where these gas utilities are spending more money than they ever have before, but they're also getting less customers uh, paying into the system. And then they also have other costs like utilities will subsidize new gas hookups, something that is currently before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities and something we are arguing against. Because obviously, from an energy affordability point of view, it is quite bad that all of these gas utilities are spending a lot of money. At the same time, they're having less customers than ever, because that does mean that they're kind of locked into having to charge higher prices just to continue being financially operational. And we could enter a scenario where if it becomes cheaper for everyone to, double down on energy efficiency or switch to electric heat pumps or, do whatever it takes to use less gas because gas has just become so expensive, that kind of starts feeding into a doom loop where there's ever less customers, but there's still maintenance costs that need to be paid. So the gas utilities have to increase rates. And I mean, that is something that is a real problem that we could be facing. And that is something where if we just make another gas pipeline going down to Pennsylvania, it would not solve the fundamental problems that we face. In fact, I know New England has more capacity to import gas than we actually have been over the last couple of winters, because we do have a big liquefied natural gas terminal where we can import gas from anywhere on the globe in actually only a couple miles from where I live in Everett. And we've barely been using that big piece of infrastructure, despite the fact that Massachusetts gas customers have been paying for it in their bills, because there just hasn't been enough demand to really need to use it. So building another pipeline would not actually bring down the cost of gas, despite what I think some fossil fuel interests are kind of trying to convince people of.
So, Carrie, bottom line here is that some people are thinking that gas is cheap and bills are high because of clean energy, is what the narrative that we've been hearing. And I guess you're trying to say that the prognosis or the future for gas is iffy, right? It looks like gas could go up in price over time, right?
Yeah, this is definitely all more, what I'm saying is more true for the distributing gas to like individuals' homes through their gas utilities. This doesn't necessarily impact natural gas power plants. Those are kind of two different, for lack of a better term, like economic systems where one can be doing really bad and the other one can be fine. They're not entirely connected,
Yeah.
but at least on the building side, the sheer cost of maintaining all of the gas pipes to everyone's homes really requires a lot of people to be buying gas. And if that stops being true, gas just has to become more expensive.
Now, a lot of we've read and heard a lot of consumers think that the new pipelines would help reduce the cost. Can you just the gas utilities are they willing to build those pipelines with money from shareholders, or are they looking to ratepayers for that?
Yeah, that's kind of the one big issue with the idea of let's build another pipeline is, well, someone is going to have to pay for it. And if it's going in to meet the needs of gas utility customers, then it would be gas utility customers. So you could see your bill increase for this piece of infrastructure, which to be blunt, really isn't needed. New England is has historically been pretty gas constrained. Like we haven't been able to get as much gas um, in New England as we would like from like the big shale producing areas in Pennsylvania because there hasn't been that many pipelines. But we've also been fairly good at adapting to that. A lot of power plants switch from gas to oil, which means that we can kind of live with the gas capacity that we have. And as I said before, we have the ability to bring in massive amounts of natural gas from out of the country by sea through the Everett Marine Terminal. And we really haven't been doing that. So the idea that we need a new pipeline is a bit like saying we need a second car, even if we're just one person. It's not quite clear what it would even be used for.
All right. Now, Tina is our Rhode Island policy advocate. We've got Carrie in Massachusetts and Tina in Rhode Island. They do a great job talking to legislators and the executive branch, but you're hearing similar things in Rhode Island, I think. Tina, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, thank you, Larry. And I want to preface by saying my next two slides utilize examples that I've seen in Rhode Island, but many of the themes, similar to what Carrie had just touched on, are applicable to both states. So in this first slide, the image you see came from Rhode Island's Energy Efficiency Council and details some of the many benefits of energy efficiency and the benefits that we as ratepayers, if you have Rhode Island Energy as your utility, are paying for. One of the main points is that energy efficiency can lower utility costs by reducing the total amount of electricity that we need to purchase, because if you weatherize your home or you increase, the insulation in your home or the insulation in your attic, the units of fuel that you're using or the units of electricity that you're using to heat your home or cool your home can be used more efficiently, and you don't need to use as much or buy as much to heat your home or to cool your home. I also want to note this big takeaway in the middle that for about every $1 invested into energy efficiency, that results in $3 of benefits to Rhode Islanders. And related to that point, energy efficiency has benefits outside of just that monetary value or reduced greenhouse gas emissions, but energy efficiency also has big public health benefits. For example, if someone were to install a heat pump in their home, they would be using a highly efficient electric appliance, But because they're using an electric appliance and can get rid of their fossil fuel burning appliance, they're no longer combusting a fuel in their home, and their indoor air quality can be improved, which improves the health of the occupants of that dwelling. I also want to note that for a greater public health benefit, installing a heat pump, say my colleague Carrie installs a heat pump, even though she in her own home is no longer combusting fossil fuels, the outdoor air quality improves as well, and her neighbors can also experience improved air quality and those benefits of energy efficiency. So while one person may be installing an energy efficiency or an electrification measure, those benefits are not just felt by that one person, they're felt by many other people. And when that's expanded across states or across societies, that leads to many more sizable benefits. My next slide, I want to outline clean energy costs and what we've been seeing with clean energy costs on utility bills. So this slide has used data from Rhode Island Energy's proposed rate change from a docket that was in front of Rhode Island's Public Utilities Commission earlier this spring. And the rows highlighted in green are clean energy investments, and the rows highlighted in orange are the largest bill contributors on the average residential ratepayer bill. And this would be for a residential customer utilizing 500 kilowatt hours of electricity per month. So this past winter, we've seen a lot of concern about the high utility bills that ratepayers are facing. And there at times has been an emphasis or even a blame placed on clean energy spending or clean energy public policy measures as what's created that cost burden. But the truth is that by investing in energy efficiency and by investing in clean energy, we can drive down reliance on fossil fuels, particularly volatile fossil fuel prices. And if you look at the rows highlighted both in green and orange, you can see that those clean energy programs in green are quite a small overall percentage and overall dollar amount on a monthly utility bill, whereas those orange charges are both the largest dollar amount and the largest percentage contributor to utility bills. So when there's this emphasis placed on clean energy spending as the reason for why customer bills are so high, that is not, the entire story. We really need to look at the entire bill as, one piece that ratepayers are paying for and not pick out individual policies and how those are impacting people, especially as utility costs and electric costs vary per season from winter to summer for Rhode Island Energy last resort customers and can vary more frequently for ratepayers that utilize a community aggregation program or a third-party supplier.
Tina, can I stop you for 1 second? This is sort of a moment, a teachable moment here, which is the reason we were showing this. We calculated that the clean energy spending increased 2.6%, but we observed that a TV reporter in Rhode Island went on live on TV and was asking, I think, a legislator why clean energy spending was going up 43%. And so if you look at the top row in green, one of the programs went up 43%, but it's a small program, and the reporter ignored the other clean energy programs. So we did the math, and it wasn't, the total of them only increased by 2.6%. So that's an example. I don't think the reporter was trying to spread disinformation. But the caution we have for everybody tonight is even the media can make mistakes, believe it or not. And we if we see a mistake, we need to try to call them out on it. And so we wrote a blog about that. And we caution you. We don't want to say that it's fake news. It was not good reporting though. And if you're in Rhode Island and you hear at a barbecue that clean energy spending went up 43%, someone maybe saw that on TV and just thinks that it's gospel, and we know that it's not. So,
Larry, if I could add on to your point, I just want to highlight as well that while it's true that renewable energy growth charge increased by 43%, when you look at the dollar value of that charge, it only increased from $4.02 to about $5.75. And that renewable energy growth charge is a fixed charge on Rhode Island Energy last resort service electric bills, meaning that charge will not fluctuate with your monthly usage. So if you use more than 500 kilowatt hours or less, that dollar value will not go up or go down. And, while we don't want to, not show that utility costs and affordability is the problem, because we definitely see that affordability can be difficult in certain times. We want to highlight that clean energy spending is a prudent and good investment that helps Rhode Islanders and helps us meet our climate goals and can drive economic growth.
Correct. Yes, we'll come back to that. Thank you, Tina. You want to go to the next slide? Just want to point out that one of the groups that we work closely with is the Alliance for Climate Transition, and they have a web page dedicated to resources about misinformation. So if you want another look at what another organization is saying about this, they're doing the same thing we're trying to do tonight. So that's a resource that you might want to take a peek at. Next slide. We have a lot of really cool events as an organization in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We've got May 6th, Anna's doing electric vehicle charging at home. May 10th, 19th, and June 4th, we've got events in Rhode Island. Solar Tour, Wind Turbine Tour, our spring meeting on May 19th in Providence at a beautiful location. Anna again on June 11th, electric vehicle charging on the go. June 26th, more Anna, is a used EV right for you? Not just Anna, but also Caroline. And you can we keep adding events, so go to our webpage and you can learn about those. Next slide. Oh, we are a nonprofit organization and we do a great job. You just heard 4 outstanding speakers talk about misinformation, disinformation. They're experts on all these things, but I have to pay them. And so if you could donate, it's tax deductible, and I would appreciate it, and I think they would too. But more importantly, this helps achieve our mission, where we are trying to speed a just transition, and we do it through a combination of programs and advocacy. It's my job to ask. Next slide. Now, Anna, there's something big happening. Could you explain what's happening and how people can help?
Yes, this right here is an example of misinformation and disinformation in action. So Massachusetts and Rhode Island have both adopted a series of regulations out of California. So California writes regulations. Other states have the ability to adopt those regulations that have to do with vehicle efficiency and emissions. And there is a nationwide effort, mostly funded by automakers and the fossil fuel lobby, to undo those regulations. So you may have heard news on the federal level that there are several simultaneous attempts, both in Congress and in the courts, to basically undo the part of the Clean Air Act that allows states like California, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island to have these regulations in the first place. And so you might have heard about tomorrow, the House of Representatives federally will be voting on a Congressional Review Act of these waivers. The Supreme Court is hearing a case that has to do with this, but we're not talking about federal stuff today, we're talking about state stuff. So just as there's a campaign focused at the federal government, governors across the country are under a lot of pressure from those same actors to delay these regulations. So the key ones that we're talking about today are called Advanced Clean Cars 2. They require automakers to slowly ramp up the percentage of new vehicles that they sell in Massachusetts and Rhode Island as electric over time. So it's a gradual transition. There's lots of flexibilities built in to make it possible for automakers to comply, but governors, again, are under a lot of pressure to delay. So we are having a somewhat emergency webinar tomorrow. We'll be joined by the Natural Resources Defense Council, an organization called Green Latinos, and the Union of Concerned Scientists, and we'll talk about what the heck is ACC2, Why is it so critical for climate and public health? What is happening? How is it under attack at the federal and state level? And how do we take action? And so right now, the big call to action is in Massachusetts to call Governor Healy and ask her to stand strong in the face of all the pressure that states are under to delay. In Rhode Island right now, there's a little bit less pressure because Rhode Island isn't starting implementation this year anyway. Rhode Island's sort of 1 year behind, so there isn't a lot of pressure there yet. But in Massachusetts, there certainly is. So please join us on Thursday. We'll talk about all this, and then we'll actually just take 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for everybody to email and or call Governor Healy's office. So hope you can join us on Thursday.
Anna, we can send information about how they can contact the governor with the follow-up to this as well.
Yes, and I will also put it in the chat.
Very good. Thank you. All right, next slide, please, Tina. Questions, here we are. All right, so got some questions. We'll spread them around. Amanda, somebody asked about maintenance cost on wind and solar. Are comparing that to the maintenance of gas pipelines and fossil fuel facilities. Are wind and solar expensive to maintain?
So I would say, first of all, that operation and maintenance costs for wind and solar are factored into the fixed price that developers contract with the state. So offshore wind and solar are developed at a fixed price through what's called a power purchase agreement, which sets the rate that we're going to be paying for their energy over 20 to 30 years, or however long the contract is for. So it's already kind of shown when they bid that price. I'll also add that wind and solar systems are able to generate electricity without burning fuel. So, there's no need for procuring the fuel and the delivery infrastructure for the fuel. We don't have to figure out where we're going to store the fuel on site. We don't need the systems for combusting the fuel. So I think overall, offshore wind and solar don't have the same level of, operations and maintenance costs that fossil fuels do.
Very good. Anna, here's one for you. When we talk about the life cycle of a car, does that include of an electric car? Does that include the disposal of the electric battery?
The particular resource that we pointed to from the Union of Concerned Scientists, who are the science people who did that analysis, does not include disposal. However, there's really exciting developments on that front. So a lot of people are really concerned about the end of life of electric vehicle batteries. But the good news is that when a battery is no longer fit to be used in an electric vehicle, if the overall sort of capacity has decreased a certain amount in year 15 or whatever of the vehicle's life, it still has enough charge to be used as stationary storage. So there are examples already and have been for years of different types of entities using used electric vehicle batteries for either backup power or to basically serve as grid storage to balance out supply and demand, either for the grid or for particular sites that draw a lot of power and want to reduce their demand overall. So point one is you can reuse the batteries. Point two is you can recycle the batteries. So all of the batteries that we're talking about today or in the market right now are lithium-ion batteries, and they all have lots of metals and minerals in them that have a lot of value. So it's unlikely that at the end of a life of a vehicle or at the end of the battery's life, that those are just going to get chucked in a landfill somewhere because people can make money from recycling them. So there are several companies that have come into force in the last couple of years that are working with automakers to make that a more closed loop so that automakers can take recycled minerals from used batteries and build them into new batteries. One company in particular is called Redwood Materials, but there's lots more. The Inflation Reduction Act put a lot of support into this space, which is one of the many reasons why we are really concerned about any potential rollbacks at the federal level. But the industry as a whole is looking into recycling in a big way, which is exciting, but definitely something we'll need to keep an eye on for sure.
Very good. Question. A few of you are going to answer this one. I'll start with Amanda. Is there a discussion about promoting geothermal heat pumps? We've been talking mostly about air source heat pumps, but how about geothermal?
I think that geothermal is definitely going to be a key piece of the puzzle. It is a very efficient heating source, even more efficient than air source heat pumps, which are already very efficient. I think there are some pilots happening in Massachusetts, which maybe Carrie can say more about.
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of worth breaking geothermal into just two different categories. There is like the single household, single pump geothermal systems, which have been around for a while. Those are great. They are more expensive to build up front, but you do get savings on them because they are more efficient. They use less electricity. And importantly, when we're talking about stress to the electric grid, they are the most efficient compared to air source heat pumps when it is coldest out, which means they deliver savings right at the point where the value of electricity is highest, which makes them very useful from an energy standpoint. Um, there's some incentives for those, I think through Mass Save, and I think probably through the Rhode Island equivalent as well. I think one challenging thing is the utilities are less enthusiastic about these single air source heat pump ground source heat pumps because they don't own them, and they also use less electricity, which means the utilities don't get to build as much infrastructure as they would like to because that's how they make money. Um, so I think that's kind of one area holding it, like the high cost and the fact that it's not in the utilities' interest to promote them are two things holding them back. But it is a developed and really cool technology with some major companies involved in installing heat pumps across the area. As far as like geothermal, there's also the newer network geothermal systems, which there are two pilot. Sorry, I keep saying that. There's one pilot happening right now in Massachusetts that's currently built, and what it is, it's basically a lot of geothermal heat pumps all connected together that kind of share heat from one another. So if you have like an ice rink that needs to pump out a lot of coldness, you can do that into the system, and then it can be taken up by maybe a house that's trying to air condition itself. It's a very that can be even more efficient than single ground source heat pumps because buildings are kind of sharing the energy load. And the utilities are more interested in this concept because they are interested in the idea that they would build this and that it could, in theory, kind of be a system that replaces the gas system for them. And by that, I mean like a massive piece of infrastructure that people use to heat their homes that's both cost effective for the customer, so people want to connect to it, and is really big and expensive to build, which means the utilities would be allowed to charge a lot of money um, in order to like be paid back for the money that because they're always incentivized to spend more money, and this is something they would get to spend more money on. So they are really interested in this idea as sometimes sort of maybe a way that they could get away from gas when they are in a mood to acknowledge that's actually something they're going to have to do, which is not something they're consistent about.
And I'll
T-
just add on for some additional information in Rhode Island. We have colleagues at the advocacy organization Climate Jobs Rhode Island that are supporting a bill in the Rhode Island House. It's Bill 5576, the Thermal Energy Networks and Jobs Act, which would direct our public utility, Rhode Island Energy, to maximize investments in thermal energy networks or district geothermal when it's in the public interest. And Rhode Island also has a future of gas study or a future of gas docket that's open at our Public Utilities Commission, exploring the future of the gas regulated distribution system in light of our Act on Climate. And when that final report comes out, perhaps in May, we're hoping that that will also explore geothermal and what Rhode Island can do to explore that as an option to help meet our climate goals.
Thank you. We're getting close to wrapping up. Lisa puts in the Q&A that reminder that we still have the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, which offers a lot of tax credits for clean energy. But for geothermal, it's a very generous tax credit. It's 30% on the entire cost of a ground source heat pump or geothermal. It's 30% for an air source heat pump, but only up to $2,000, and which is still pretty good. But for the ground source heat pump, if you do that, it makes it can be very competitive with fossil fuels. So now I get a question I'm going to ask everyone to answer. Question is, should we be more proactive in setting the narrative about the benefits of clean energy, or are we reacting to this anti-wind, anti-EV, anti-heat pump stuff? Or are we should we not be talking about disinformation and misinformation, or should we just be talking about benefits? I'll go in order. Anna.
I was not expecting to be first in order. I think this is a really tricky balance, and I think it's something I personally think about a lot. I've learned from our excellent marketing team that if you repeat a myth, even if you repeat it just for the purpose of showing that it is a myth, it solidifies in people's minds. So I try to both keep that in mind and really stress the benefits and just talk about what we know is true, but also acknowledge that some level of education about like what is misinformation versus what is disinformation, who are the forces behind the myths that we do here, is also motivating. So those are sort of two slightly opposing instincts, but I try to balance those two. So when we're out at electric vehicle events or talking to legislators, we'll talk about the positives. You'll see at the webinar on Thursday about advanced clean cars too. It's a webinar about why we need it and how excellent it is, and how it will help our economy and public health and our climate missions, all that. That's really the focus and the thrust of that webinar, even though maybe the timing of it is a response to a lot of the misconceptions and disinformation that are floating around, particularly right now. So I hope that answered the question.
It does. Carrie, should we be saying that clean energy is good, or should we be saying it's not bad?
So this actually goes back to the first campaign I was ever involved with in politics, which was a ballot initiative on transgender rights. And the thing we had to talk to people about at the doors, because I was obviously arguing for transgender rights, was bathrooms. Because that's what people cared about. That's what everyone was concerned about. And we knew that's what the opposition was going to scare people about closer to the election. So we talked about this issue. We talked about the facts around it. We educated folks. We even showed people like a kind of video that the opposition had used in an earlier campaign in Houston, and then had a conversation with voters about why the video and the fear mongering didn't actually make any logical sense. And that was really effective. And, that ballot initiative, we defeated the ballot initiative. Confusingly, we were the Yes campaign, but we won in 2018, so it doesn't matter that that was confusing. Um, and I think that really goes to, you have to talk to people where you're at, even if you'd rather be talking about other things. It's important to acknowledge what your opposition is going to throw at you, because if you can respond effectively, you can beat it, even if they come up with very emotional, very impactful nonsense. As long as you take the time to point out that it is nonsense, you can win, which is something I very much believe in.
Very good. Amanda, are there benefits to wind turbines other than the fact that they don't kill whales?
There certainly are, yes. And I think both Anna and Carrie answered this question well in that, we definitely need to be telling the positive story of, in my case, offshore wind and, really keeping all of the benefits at the top of the news cycle. But with that being said, I think that the misinformation has been repeated so much, like that offshore wind supposedly kills whales, that if we don't respond to that, they're going to think that we don't have an answer. So I do agree that, we should largely keep it positive, but I think we also need to respond to some of the common myths that we're seeing, such as the whales one. And we need to clearly state that that is not true and call that out.
Yeah. Now, Tina, you are our interviewer on our podcast. Do you want to talk about the podcast before you break?
Yes, I would love to. So, Green Energy Consumers Alliance has a new podcast. It's called Consumers for Climate. And we recently launched at the end of this winter, but we've started with just giving overviews of that podcast with several of our fellow staff members here at Green Energy Consumers Alliance, focusing on some of our main topics. And in that, we both addressed commonly asked questions or things that we've heard that we'd like to go into more depth about. So, for example, with Anna, we did a Transportation 101 focusing on electric vehicles. And we went into questions about charging, where to charge, how to fund an electric vehicle, what's available for people that are interested in potentially purchasing or leasing an electric vehicle. And those are great short resources if folks are interested in any of our topics. My colleague Amanda did one on offshore wind. Carrie did one on Massachusetts policy. One of our other colleagues, Loie, did a great one on heat pumps and energy efficient fisheries. And you can look to that on our website as just another resource that will help you navigate clean energy technology or understand a little bit more questions that come up at family barbecues and help you understand what the truth is on some of these big topics.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank our guest for coming tonight, and we appreciate the comments. Rob loves the podcast. Which one was the best, Rob? Was it the one I did? I wonder. Maybe not. But I want to thank Anna, Carrie, Amanda, and Tina. They do a great job every day, but in particular for the last hour. So watch everybody for your email. We will send you the slides, the recording, and some other information as well. Have a good night.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, all.